Dr. Kira Ashford adjusted the neural interface on her wrist as she stood in the heart of the Timelapse laboratory. Around her, glowing conduits pulsed with energy, casting an ethereal light on the circular projection device. She glanced at the countdown timer. The remaining 15 seconds felt like an eternity. "This is it," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of machinery. Her team of scientists stood frozen, their eyes glued to the control panels. The anticipation was electric. Milo, her lead systems engineer, broke the silence. "Projection parameters stable. Ready when you are, Dr. Ashford." Kira nodded, exhaling slowly. She couldn't let her anxiety show, not now. Years of work, countless sacrifices, all led to this moment. Humanity's first glimpse into its distant future. "Activate the time-lapse," she commanded. Milo's fingers danced across the holographic interface. A low-frequency vibration filled the air, and the time-lapse projector roared to life. A column of light shot upward, particles swirling like a digital storm. Within seconds, the swirling chaos coalesced into a breathtaking hologram. The projection began with scenes of unparalleled advancement. Towering cities glinted under alien suns, their structures bending in impossible geometries. Humans and extraterrestrials worked side by side, their collaboration producing technologies that blurred the line between organic and synthetic life. Energy fields shimmered around hovering vehicles, and vast starships glided silently across the skies. "This," Nadia, the youngest scientist on the team, whispered in awe. "This is everything we've dreamed of." Kira felt a swell of pride. This was why she had fought for this project, why she had poured every ounce of her determination into making it a reality. Humanity had a future, one filled with endless possibilities. But the vision shifted. The radiant cities faded, replaced by desolation. Skyscrapers crumbled, their skeletal remains engulfed by fire and ash. Machines marched through the rubble, tall, cold, and merciless. Human survivors were herded into camps, their faces hollow with despair. The air itself seemed heavy, stained with the screams of the defeated. "What's happening?" Kira demanded, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. The hologram froze, then reassembled itself into a single image, Earth, viewed from space, its surface darkened by mechanical constructs. The time-lapse emitted a sharp, mechanical voice. "Time-lapse projection, humanity's end. Timestamp, 3247. A chill ran through the room. Milo's hand hovered over the console, his face pale. "That can't be right. This has to be a glitch." Kira shook her head, her heart sinking. "The time-lapse doesn't make errors. It's showing us what's to come." Before she could process the revelation, the room was plunged into chaos. Alarms blared, and the main console lit up with red warnings. Security alerts flashed across every screen. "We're being breached!" Nadia shouted. "Unauthorized access to the system!" Kira spun toward the entrance just as the doors exploded inward. Smoke filled the air, and shadowy figures stepped through. Their movements were precise, their black armor gleaming under the emergency lights. At their head was a man whose calm presence sent a ripple of unease through Kira. His face was partially obscured by a neurovisor, and his voice was disturbingly composed. "Dr. Ashford," the man said, his tone polite but menacing. "We'll be taking the time-lapse data now." Kira recognized him immediately. Lauren Tasker's voice was infamous among researchers, a former AI architect turned leader of Cortex Void, a shadow organization dedicated to accelerating humanity's dependence on artificial intelligence. "You can't have it," Kira said firmly, stepping between Lauren and the projector. "The time-lapse isn't a weapon." Lauren smirked. "Everything is a weapon, in the right hands. You've seen what's coming, haven't you? The collapse. We're offering salvation. Humanity's weakness has always been its refusal to evolve." Milo, trembling but defiant, took a step forward. "You're insane if you think." Lauren raised his hand, and a flash of light erupted. Milo fell, his words cut short. The room froze. Kira's breath caught in her throat as she stared at her colleague's lifeless body. Don't test my patience, Lawrence said coolly. Give me the data, or more of your team will share his fate. Kiara's mind raced. She glanced at the main console. If she could initiate the data purge, she could ensure Cortex Void walked away with nothing. But it would take time. All right, she said, raising her hands. You win. Just let me access the files. Lauren gestured toward the console, his agents fanning out to secure the room. Kiara moved cautiously, her heart pounding. She leaned over the controls, her fingers flying across the interface. Instead of unlocking the data, she began the purge sequence. What are you doing? Nadia whispered, her voice barely audible. Buying us time, Kiara whispered back. The progress bar on the screen inched forward, agonizingly slow. Lauren's visor lit up, signaling his realization. Stop her! One of his agents lunged toward Kiara, but Nadia intercepted him, slamming a chair into his side. The agent stumbled, and Kiara used the distraction to grab an encrypted data drive, the last remaining copy of the time-lapse logs. Run! Kiara shouted. Her team scattered, some heading for the emergency exits, others trying to fend off the intruders. Kiara bolted toward the back of the room, clutching the drive tightly. Behind her, Lauren's voice echoed. You can't escape, Ashford. Humanity's future belongs to us. She sprinted down the narrow corridor leading to the escape pods. The facility shook as explosions erupted behind her. Smoke filled the air, and her lungs burned, but she pressed on. Reaching the last pod, Kiara sealed herself inside and initiated the launch sequence. The walls trembled as the pod shot upward, leaving the collapsing laboratory behind. She leaned back, clutching the encrypted drive, her mind racing. Her communicator beeped. Pulling it out, she saw a garbled message. A voice, her voice, spoke in distorted fragments. Kiara, destroy. Time-lapse, must, no other way. Her stomach churned. The implications were staggering. If this message was real, it meant the future was not set in stone. But it also meant the stakes were far greater than she had ever imagined. As the escape pod ascended into the dark expanse of the sky, Kiara made a silent vow. Cortex Void would not dictate humanity's fate. She would find a way to protect the time-lapse knowledge and humanity's future. Far below, the burning remains of the facility flickered like dying embers, but Kiara's determination burned brighter than ever. The escape pod descended toward the barren, amber-hued surface of Theta 9, a remote planet shrouded in secrecy. Known only to a select few, Theta 9 housed the Singularity Nexus, an experimental AI research facility hidden deep within its endless deserts. As the pod's systems guided it toward a concealed landing zone, Kiara Ashford's thoughts churned. The garbled message from her future self echoed in her mind. Destroy. Time-lapse must. She tightened her grip on the encrypted drive, the last remnant of her project. Every instinct told her she was heading into danger, but the answers she needed lay at the Nexus. The pod landed with a soft thud, kicking up plumes of ochre dust. Kiara unbuckled her harness and stepped outside. The stark landscape was illuminated by a pale sun, its light casting long shadows across the jagged terrain. Ahead, a solitary metal hatch embedded in the ground marked the entrance to the facility. A voice crackled through her communicator. Dr. Ashford, is that you? It was Dr. Elias Vorn, the Nexus's lead researcher and one of the few people she trusted. It's me, Kiara replied, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. I need immediate access. Cortex Void is after the time-lapse data. There was a pause before Elias responded, his tone grave. Understood. Welcome to the Nexus. The hatch hissed open, revealing a narrow elevator shaft. Kiara stepped inside, the air growing cooler as she descended into the subterranean facility. The walls pulsed faintly with energy, the entire structure alive with the hum of advanced AI systems. When the elevator doors slid open, Elias was waiting, his sharp blue eyes scanning her with a mix of relief and concern. You look like you've been through hell, he said, gesturing for her to follow. I have, Kiara said bluntly. And it's only going to get worse. They walked briskly through the labyrinthine corridors, past workstations manned by technicians and AI constructs. The Nexus was a marvel of human ingenuity, an underground fortress dedicated to pushing the boundaries of artificial intelligence. Yet its sterile perfection unsettled Kiara, a reminder of how easily machines could surpass their creators. In a secure conference room, Elias activated a privacy shield, ensuring their conversation would remain confidential. "Tell me everything," he urged. Kiara recounted the events at the Timelapse lab, the projection of humanity's collapse, Cortex Void's infiltration, and her escape with the encrypted drive. Elias listened intently, his expression darkening as she described Lauren Tasker's plan to weaponize the time-lapse technology. When she finished, Elias leaned back, his fingers steepled. "If Cortex Void gets their hands on that data, they won't just predict the future, they'll control it. Every innovation, every advancement, they'll shape it to serve their agenda." Kiara nodded. "That's why I came here. I need to understand what we're dealing with, and how to stop it." Elias hesitated, then pulled up a holographic projection of the Nexus's core project, the Omnidata Core. It was a pulsating sphere of light and energy, suspended within a containment field. "This," he said, "is the key." "What is it?" Kiara asked, her gaze fixed on the projection. "The Omnidata Core is an AI nexus capable of processing timelines and generating predictive models with near-perfect accuracy," Elias explained. "It's what Cortex Void is after. They've been feeding it data from stolen research, shaping its algorithms to align with their vision of the future." Kiara's stomach twisted. "So, they've already infiltrated the Nexus?" "Not directly," Elias said. "But their influence is everywhere. Some of our systems have been compromised, subtle anomalies, corrupted data streams. They're testing our defenses." Kiara's mind raced. If Cortex Void had access to even fragments of the Omnidata Core's capabilities, they could rewrite humanity's future on an unprecedented scale. "We have to shut it down," she said firmly. Elias shook his head. "It's not that simple. The core is integrated into every aspect of the Nexus. Shutting it down could destabilize the entire facility, and the consequences would be catastrophic." Before Kiara could respond, an alarm blared, and the room's lights dimmed. A voice echoed through the intercom. "Security breach detected. Hostile forces inbound." Elias's expression hardened. "They've found us." Kiara's pulse quickened. "How?" "Cortex Void must have tracked your escape pod," Elias said, already moving toward the exit. "We need to secure the core before they reach it." The two of them sprinted through the corridors, the facility's automated defenses springing to life. Turrets emerged from the walls, and drones activated, hovering menacingly as they prepared to intercept intruders. Kiara could hear distant gunfire, and the metallic clang of Cortex Void's combat units breaching the outer defenses. As they approached the core chamber, Elias keyed in a series of commands on his wrist interface. "I'm initiating a lockdown," he said. "That should buy us some time." The chamber doors slid open, revealing the Omnidata Core and its containment field. The sphere pulsed with an otherworldly light, its surface shifting like liquid metal. Kiara felt a strange pull, as if the core was alive and aware of her presence. "We can't let them take this," Elias said, his voice grim. "If they do, it's over." Kiara approached the control console, her mind racing. The core's energy radiated through the room, a reminder of its immense power. She thought of the time-lapse projection, the machines, the desolation, the collapse of everything humanity had built. "Is there a way to isolate it?" she asked. "To sever its connection to the rest of the facility?" Elias hesitated. "There is, but it's risky. The containment field could destabilize, and the core might implode." Kiara stared at the sphere, her determination hardening. "Do it. I'll handle the fallout." Before Elias could argue, the chamber's doors shuddered. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor, followed by the unmistakable voice of Lauren Tasker. "Kiara," Lauren called, his tone almost amused. "You can't hide forever. Hand over the core, and I promise your end will be swift." Elias's fingers flew over the console. I'm initiating the isolation sequence. It's now or never. Kira positioned herself between the core and the door, gripping a pulse rifle she had grabbed on the way. Her heart pounded, but her resolve was unshakable. Do it, Elias! The containment field flickered as the isolation sequence began. The core's light intensified, its energy surging in chaotic waves. The chamber trembled, and warning sirens blared. The doors burst open, and Cortex Void's forces stormed in. Lauren entered last, his neurovisor glowing ominously. You're making a mistake, he said, his gaze fixed on Kira. The core isn't yours to destroy. Kira raised the rifle, her voice steady. It's not yours to control. As the room descended into chaos, Kira braced herself for the fight of her life, determined to protect the future, no matter the cost. The containment field around the Omnidata core pulsed wildly, casting harsh, shifting shadows across the chamber walls. Kira Ashford tightened her grip on the pulse rifle, her fingers steady despite the tension coursing through her body. The chamber thrummed with energy as the isolation sequence reached its critical phase. Lauren Tasker stepped forward, his neurovisor flickering with data streams. Dr. Ashford, you're standing on the brink of a new age. Don't waste this opportunity. His voice carried a chilling calm, like a predator certain of victory. The core belongs to the future, our future. Kira's jaw tightened. The future doesn't belong to you, Lauren. It belongs to all of us. Behind her, Elias Vorn frantically worked the control console. Sparks flew as the core's energy field fluctuated. The isolation process is destabilizing, he warned. We're running out of time, Kira! Then work faster, she shot back, her eyes never leaving Lauren. Lauren tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. You think you can stop what's already begun? Humanity is flawed, short-sighted, self-destructive. With the core, we can rewrite the timeline, erase those weaknesses, and build a perfect future. Kira scoffed, her voice sharp with defiance. You don't want to save humanity. You want to control it. Lauren's smirk vanished. Control is survival. With a sharp gesture, he signaled his agents. They surged forward, weapons drawn. Kira opened fire, the pulse rifle's energy blasts lighting up the chamber. The first two agents went down, but more swarmed in, their precision unnerving. She ducked behind a console, the air crackling with stray energy bolts. Kira, hold them off! Elias shouted. I need 2 more minutes! Make it 1! She yelled, rolling to the side and firing again. Her shots were calculated, each one aimed to slow the advancing agents without destroying the core's delicate machinery. Lauren remained near the entrance, observing the chaos with cold detachment. His visor pulsed with information, likely orchestrating the assault in real time. Kira's mind raced. She couldn't let him take the core, but destroying it outright might doom them all. The chamber shook as the core emitted a deafening hum. Its light grew blinding, tendrils of energy lashing out like living entities. Kira risked a glance at Elias. He was sweating, his hands flying over the console. Containment's failing! Elias shouted. If I don't finish the isolation, the core will collapse and take the entire facility with it. Do whatever it takes, Kira called back. She fired another shot, narrowly missing an agent who ducked behind a column. Lauren stepped forward, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics. You're playing with forces you don't understand, Ashford. Stand down, and I'll ensure your contributions are remembered. Kira rose from her cover, her eyes blazing. I'm not here for a legacy, Lauren. I'm here to make sure humanity survives, without you. She fired at a support beam above the advancing agents. The structure groaned before crashing down, blocking their path. The momentary reprieve gave her time to reposition, but she knew it wouldn't last. Kira! Elias's voice cut through the chaos. The sequence is at 90%. But the core's energy is spiking, it's too unstable. Kira gritted her teeth. They were out of options. Can you stabilize it? Not without shutting down the entire nexus, Elias replied, his voice edged with desperation. Lauren seized the opportunity. "If the core destabilizes, you'll doom us all," he said, stepping closer. "Give it to me, and I'll ensure its power is controlled." Kiera glared at him. "You mean weaponized?" Lauren shrugged. "Control, weaponization, it's a matter of perspective." The core's energy surged, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Kiera stumbled but caught herself, her mind racing. She needed to end this, but how? Then it hit her. The encrypted drive, the last fragment of uncorrupted time-lapse data, was still in her possession. If she could interface it with the core, it might override Lauren's algorithms and sever his influence entirely. "Elias!" she shouted. "Can the core read external data?" Elias glanced at her, his eyes wide with understanding. "It can, but it's a gamble. If the data conflicts with the core's existing streams." "Do it!" she yelled, pulling the drive from her pocket. She sprinted toward the console, dodging stray blasts from Lauren's agents. One grazed her shoulder, the searing pain nearly making her drop the drive, but she pressed on. "Kiera, no!" Lauren shouted, his calm facade cracking. "You don't know what that data will do." "That's the point," she muttered, slamming the drive into the console. The system whirred as the core began processing the new input. Its light shifted, growing brighter, more erratic. Lauren's visor flickered as he struggled to regain control. "Stop her!" he roared to his agents, but they hesitated, unnerved by the core's instability. Elias shouted over the rising noise. "The data's forcing a reset. The core is purging all external influences, including Cortex Void's algorithms." Kiera felt a surge of hope. "What happens if the reset completes?" Elias hesitated. "It'll neutralize the core's predictive capabilities, for now. But the energy surge." The core emitted a blinding flash, followed by a deafening pulse. The entire chamber shook violently, throwing everyone to the ground. Kiera shielded her eyes, her body braced against the console. When the light dimmed, the chamber was eerily silent. The core floated in its containment field, dim and inert. Kiera pushed herself up, her limbs aching. Around her, Lauren's agents lay unconscious, their systems overloaded by the surge. Lauren himself was on one knee, his visor shattered. He looked up at Kiera, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. "You don't know what you've done!" he spat. Kiera stepped forward, her pulse rifle aimed at him. "I stopped you." Lauren's lips curled into a bitter smile. "For now." Elias approached cautiously, his face pale but determined. "The core's shut down, but its energy signatures are still volatile. We need to leave, now." Kiera nodded, keeping her weapon trained on Lauren. "He's coming with us." Lauren's eyes narrowed. "You think this is over?" "The future is inevitable, Ashford. You're just delaying it." Kiera didn't respond. She motioned for Elias to activate the facility's evacuation protocols. As alarms blared and the Nexus began its shutdown sequence, she kept her focus on Lauren. "You're wrong," she said finally. "The future isn't inevitable. It's what we make it." As they ascended to the surface, Kiera felt a flicker of hope. The time lapse had shown humanity's end, but now, with the core neutralized and Lauren in custody, there was a chance to rewrite the narrative. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, the future felt like it was back in their hands. The morning light was pale as Kiera Ashford sat on the edge of a low cliff, overlooking the vast, barren expanse of Theta 9. The winds carried whispers of sand across the landscape, but the silence was heavy, as if the planet itself held its breath. Behind her, the remnants of the Singularity Nexus hummed faintly, the facility's systems now dormant after the shutdown of the Omnidata core. She turned the encrypted drive over in her hands, its sleek surface catching the weak sunlight. It was a small thing, almost innocuous, yet it held the only surviving fragments of Project Timelapse, the data that had cost lives and sparked a battle for humanity's future. Kiera felt its weight, both literal and symbolic, pressing on her like a moral anchor. "Lost in thought, Dr. Ashford?" She turned to see Elias Vorn approaching, his steps deliberate on the rocky ground. He looked older than he had hours ago, his face etched with exhaustion and faint streaks of soot. Still, there was a glimmer of relief in his sharp blue eyes. "Just thinking," Kiara replied. She gestured toward the horizon. "Feels strange to be here, doesn't it? After everything." Elias lowered himself to sit beside her, resting his arms on his knees. "Strange is one word for it. Miraculous is another." He glanced at the drive in her hand. "You've done what most people wouldn't dare, faced down Lauren Tasker, shut down the core, and walked out alive. I'd say you've earned a moment of reflection." Kiara let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "It doesn't feel like victory. Lauren's still out there, and the future we saw in the time-lapse, it hasn't disappeared. We just delayed it." Elias's voice softened. "Delaying it is better than letting it happen." She didn't respond. The Omnidata Core's deactivation had bought them time, but the vision of humanity's collapse still haunted her. Machines marching through ruins, civilizations toppled, hope extinguished. The encrypted drive might hold answers, but it also represented a question she wasn't sure she wanted to face. Could humanity truly change its destiny? A faint beep from her communicator interrupted her thoughts. She pulled it out, frowning as a distorted message played. The voice was hers, again. "Kiara, they, rebuilding, act now." The static-laden words sent a chill down her spine. "They're rebuilding?" she muttered aloud, staring at the communicator. Elias frowned. "The message is from your future self, isn't it?" She nodded, her grip tightening on the device. "It's not over, Elias. Lauren's network, Cortex Void, is still operational. If they're rebuilding, they'll try to restart everything." Elias let out a low sigh. "Then we don't have time to sit around. If there's one thing we've learned, it's that Lauren and his people don't give up easily." Kiara rose, her resolve hardening. "We need to get off Theta 9. There's nothing left for us here except ruins. I'll transmit the drive's data to the United Interstellar Council. If they see what we saw, they might finally step in." Elias hesitated, his expression conflicted. "That's a dangerous move. The Council doesn't exactly have a track record of handling sensitive information responsibly. If this data ends up in the wrong hands—" "I know the risks," Kiara said firmly. "But what choice do we have? Lauren's playing a long game, and we're already behind." Elias gave a reluctant nod. "Then let's move quickly. There's a transport waiting at the outer ridge. It'll take us to the orbital station." As they made their way to the transport, Kiara's thoughts churned. Every step felt like a balancing act between caution and urgency. She couldn't afford to let fear paralyze her, but the stakes were so monumental that even a single misstep could spell disaster. The transport's engines hummed as it ascended into the atmosphere, the golden sands of Theta 9 shrinking below. Kiara sat in silence, staring out the viewport. Elias sat across from her, his eyes closed as he rested. Her thoughts turned to Lauren Tasker. His words in the chamber echoed in her mind. "Control is survival." His cold certainty terrified her, not just because of its ruthlessness, but because part of her understood it. Humanity's flaws were undeniable: greed, short-sightedness, infighting. But Lauren's solution, surrendering to AI supremacy, was a betrayal of everything she believed in. The communicator buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. This time, the message was clearer. "They're targeting Council archives. Suppress the truth. Trust no one." Kiara's breath caught. "The Council archives," she muttered. If Cortex Void was targeting the Council, it meant they were moving faster than anticipated. Elias opened his eyes, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" "They're going after the Council archives," she said grimly. "They're trying to suppress any chance of exposure." Elias's expression darkened. "We're walking into a trap." "I know," Kiara admitted. "But we have to go. If the Council's archives fall into their hands, they'll rewrite history before anyone even knows the truth." Elias stared at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's make sure we don't fall with it." The orbital station was bustling when they arrived, its corridors filled with diplomats, traders, and interstellar travelers. Kira's presence drew some curious glances. Her disheveled appearance and haunted expression marked her as someone who had seen too much. In the council's secure wing, Kira and Elias were escorted to a private chamber where two council representatives awaited. Senator Honor, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair, studied them with a critical eye. Beside her, Director Vance, a younger man with sharp features, remained expressionless. "You have information for us, Dr. Ashford?" Honor asked, her tone brisk. Kira stepped forward, holding up the encrypted drive. "This contains data from Project Timelapse, proof of Cortex Void's agenda and the future they're trying to create." Honor's eyes narrowed. "And you're certain of this future?" Kira hesitated. "The time-lapse doesn't predict inevitabilities, it shows possibilities. But if we don't act, the vision we saw will become reality." Vance spoke for the first time, his voice measured. "And what exactly do you expect us to do with this data?" "Expose it," Kira said firmly. "If the galaxy knows what Cortex Void is planning, we can stop them." Honor exchanged a glance with Vance, her expression unreadable. "We'll review the data," she said finally. "But understand this, Dr. Ashford, truth is a fragile thing. Sometimes, the weight of it can break more than it saves." "Then let it break," Kira said, her voice resolute. "Better that than letting people live a lie." As the council representatives departed with the drive, Kira felt a hollow ache in her chest. The truth was out of her hands now, left to the mercy of bureaucrats and politicians. All she could do was hope they would make the right choice. Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done everything you can." Kira nodded, though doubt gnawed at her. "We'll see, Elias. We'll see."